Lots to discuss, therefore, and our guest, Behnam Ben Taleblu, is a Middle East analyst for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. It's a non-profit, right-leaning think tank. I wonder if we could just start with that letter from the US, from Antony Blinken to Israel, and that warning about taking heed, taking care about what is happening on the ground within Gaza and that continuous attack from Israel.
Pleasure to be with you. Just a brief reminder, FTT is actually a nonpartisan U.S. think tank focusing only on national security. But as to the content and, in fact, context of the letter you had just mentioned, it indeed comes at an interesting time amid a political negotiation between the Americans and the Israelis over potentially acceptable targets as the Israelis look to use military force to reestablish deterrence against the Islamic Republic, probably on Iranian territory. And amid this larger proxy network, the Americans are saying, despite the show of political support, despite the show of military support with the reference to the battery, the radar for the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System, the THAAD system being sent to Israel probably within the next week, they have not taken their eyes off of the original conflict zone that started this all, and that's indeed Gaza. And I expect that to play out actually in greater political intensity and ferocity as we get closer to the end of the campaign season and, in fact, the lame duck period between November and January.
And by the lame duck period, of course, as and when when a new US leader will be implemented once we have that election on the 5th of November. Does that basically mean that at the moment Israel is doing whatever it wants on the ground?
Not indeed whatever it wants. To that effect, the letter by Blinken is a reminder that the U.S. is still looking at that one theater that started this multi-front war. Again, it was Hamas from the Gaza Strip and Israel's first military response against the Gaza Strip rather than going north like some voices in Israel had initially wanted. But no, it's not a blank check. In fact, it's a sign of politically things are divided on every front between Washington and the Israelis, perhaps even more than meets the eye. My only reference to the lame duck period was in fact, if this problem actually spirals out of control, that perhaps the more the Israelis fear that they can push things between November and January, and perhaps as the Americans may feel more politically unconstrained to push back between November and January as well.
And another cause of concern, obviously, is the situation, the tension rising when it comes to Iran. Now, I know that you specialize in all things Iranian. When Israel says that they will not be targeting Iranian nuclear sites, Iranian oil facilities, is that something that you feel will be heeded in Iran? I'm just wondering in terms of de-escalating all of this situation.
Well, the Iranian, political elite and perhaps more importantly, military elite of the Islamic Republic, including officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, promised revenge, even if, military sites were struck. They said even if there was some marginal Israeli site struck, that they would respond. Perhaps they have the opportunity to not have to marry their words with deeds. But I do think the Islamic Republic has a different political play here, which is to use the prospect of a widening war to force America into de-escalation mode rather than deterrence mode, and to perhaps threaten retaliation for Israel to be able to limit its strike. And it's doing that actually by having this kind of direct and indirect contact with the Americans, as we've seen really throughout the course of the Gaza and wider Middle East war. So the Iranians want to keep that as a surprise, that how they could respond, but at least politically they've sunk the cost, saying that they would respond. And again, it depends how one defines a military target. Even for the Israelis, is it a military or missile production site, a storage site, a military base, something that produces trucks to launch the projectiles that were fired at Israel? So it's a very broad category, even though it may seem limited to military. But I think that public reporting or the leaks saying that Israel would strike only military sites or military facilities is born out of that negotiation that had THAAD come in, that had the rest of the multi-front war come in, that had Gaza come in, and that had the politics of how the Biden administration sees the region also come in.
OK, and just when we look at the situation on the ground in Lebanon itself, of course, just has the international community, in terms of UNIFIL, the UN Defence Force that has been on the ground monitoring the situation, has there been arguably a failure when it comes to UNIFIL, when it comes to the Lebanese government as well, in not curtailing Hezbollah especially from that region in the south?
Indeed, and I wouldn't just say the Lebanese government, really the Lebanese Armed Forces. If ever there was a time for the Lebanese Armed Forces to establish its independence, for the Lebanese Armed Forces to make good on the taxpayer money that is received either from the UK or the US or the international community, to prove that it can actually deconflict and defang or disarm Hezbollah and act as an enforcer of UN Resolution 1701, and to not have to let the UNIFIL forces and other multinational forces there merely function as a speed bump, now indeed would be the time. Rather than let Hezbollah, a terrorist group, style itself as the defenders of Lebanon, now is the time, in my view, to have the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, actually be able to do that. The problem is, of course, the politics of the situation and the inability of the LAF to even bare its teeth when the cost was much, much, much less many years ago. So we are where we are structurally because the LAF and UNIFIL were unable or perhaps unwilling to perform their task for many years now, to enforce UN Resolution 1701, which put an end to this second war to the north of Israel in Lebanon in 2006.
OK, well, Behnam Ben Taleblu from the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. We have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.